Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. I know that there's a lot of noise out there these days. Everyone's under a lot of pressure. Everyone's very busy. So I know a lot of people are running webinars and stuff. So the fact that you've taken time out of your day to come along to this one, I really appreciate it. We're talking about building donorship today and individual giving. And I don't know if who here has looked at the statistics on this recently, but by all accounts in the UK at least, it's on a bit of a downward trajectory. We've seen a decrease in individual income of about 11% in the past 8 or 9 years, which is pretty crazy. So before I get into the slides, it'd be good to get people's perspectives on this. I'd love to hear you in the chat. What are the reasons do you think that we're seeing a decline in individual giving income, in donations to charities? Give me your top three reasons. Cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. Yeah. Less disposable cash. Yeah. Donor burnout. That's an interesting one. Scandals involving charities. Yeah. So many charities out there asking. Yeah. If you're just coming into the room, we're talking about why we think there's been a downturn in charitable giving over the past decade of around 11%, which is obviously very concerning. A sense of hopelessness. Everything is awful and how to pick one course to help. Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, giving in different ways, donations of time, running marathons, etc. Has anyone done any research on this themselves in their organizations with their donors and their communities to find out the reasons why? Because the research that I'm citing now is from Charities Aid Foundation. I think they interviewed, they surveyed around 15,000 people or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'm going to get started with the presentation now. Can everyone see my screen? Let me just try that again. Bear with me a moment. Okay, can everyone see the red screen there? Okay, that was strange. From quite a few of these, and that's never happened before. Thank you again for turning out today. For anyone who's been here previously, I do run these every month. You might notice this looks a little bit different to the usual slides that we have. Reason being that I recently formed a new company with a co-founder called All Things Equal. And so there's a new brand identity and all that that we're rolling out. Basically, we work with charities and we're focusing on helping them raise individual giving, which is why we've titled this one Digital Fundraising Mastery. So I'll go through that. And at the end of it, there's going to be a little bit of a spiel about how we can potentially help you if what we share today sounds helpful. Any questions along the way, please feel free to chip in. So as I shared on the outset there, we've seen that individual giving is in free fall, really, a decrease of 11% in 8 years, which is obviously quite alarming. And there are many different reasons for this, and we've alluded to some of those in the chat. Now, the report itself, you can see the link down there. I'm sure a lot of you will have looked at this, especially if you're in fundraising. It also, out of the 13,500 people surveyed, they asked them, what are the reasons for you not giving to charity, canceling your direct debits, reducing the amount that you give, etc. Um, and yeah, not being able to, affordability is obviously a big part of this. But there's also some other interesting ones in here. I think somebody said in the chat about scandals that charities have potentially been involved in, and the trust that has how that has harmed trust in the sector. 19% of people say they don't trust the charities to use their money wisely. And also some of the other stuff here around 8% haven't been asked, 9% it didn't occur to them, and 4% they just forgot. So I see in every piece of bad news, there's an opportunity to potentially unlock and increase the kind of levels of income that we get, just by asking people. That's around 20% there have just not been asked or didn't even consider donating to charity. So there's a huge amount of potential there. I think I did a bit of maths on this, and out of those 13,500 people, if that 21% could be activated, that's over 3 million for the sector additional over the course of a year. And of course, that's just 13,500 people. If you scale that up to all UK adults, I'm not saying everybody's going to give, but there's potentially tens of millions that is kind of potential, but not being asked for. It's not being activated. So there's always hope with this sort of data. But nevertheless, we are on a bit of a downward trend. And I see this as a potential emerging challenge for all kinds of communities. I see charities as the unseen hand supporting lots of different types of people and different sectors and different communities, right? I know people personally that have benefited from charitable interventions. And this is just a few of the areas that charities help: arts and culture, healthcare, youth services, substance and domestic abuse, environmental conservation, and mental health, of course, and many more different ways that charities serve our society. I think that without this philanthropic side to us as a society, I think it's going to be bad for all of us. Puts more pressure on grant organizations, more pressure on government, and yeah, we don't really want this trend to continue. So a lot of charities are responding to this by turning to grants. I know that having a good mix of income is sensible, but by all accounts, a lot of grant organizations are telling us that their demand has gone up by 50%. Just today, I've seen two posts on LinkedIn from people that have been refused any payouts from grant making organizations and not given any reasons why. And it's, yeah. I also saw another one that said from a grant maker that said that usually 1 in 3 they will award, but it's closer to 1 in 10 now. So the emerging picture seems to be that grant organizations aren't really as reliable as they used to be. In the Muslim community, there is a huge rise in individuals raising money for causes and also influencers. That's really great to hear. I hadn't heard that. If you could, is it Naeem? If you could post some,
Yeah, it's nine. Yeah, look, what we're seeing is very similar to what you mentioned.
yeah,
Individual giving is obviously there's a downturn, but I'll just quickly mention it
yeah,
that we are finding a lot of individuals, not necessarily high net worths themselves, but obviously their family members. A lot of people generally giving online, and also a lot of influencer fundraising. So somebody who's got a standing, maybe they're a comedian or an artist or something,
mm,
have to be very famous, but they're doing a lot, and there's a lot of deployments going on. So there's a few things happening in the Muslim sector that are a little bit maybe off tangent on what
mhm.
you mentioned. So I'd be happy to discuss that at some point if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. If there's any references or links you could drop in the chat for us to have a look,
Sure,
that'd be really
sure.
good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, so another thing is that some of the charities are diversifying, investing in trading activities, investing in training and recruitment, and of course, building individual giving appeals. Um, but sadly, 2023, 24, we saw nearly 4,000 charities close. Now, obviously, you can't relate that all back to donations. Um, However, it's obviously it's playing its part, right? And there's some references there to some of this stuff, which you'll be able to see on the recording afterwards. So, but one thing I just want to talk about really is this idea that money is the engine for growth. I think a lot of the times people, even experienced fundraisers, aren't so keen on asking for money, or there's some beliefs around money or beliefs around where money should come from and how it should be used that kind of gets in people's way a little bit. So, just moving forward, I just want to say that money really is it's the tool for growth and impact. That's really all it is. So we should be looking to raise money in all areas that can be dedicated to the work that we want to do. I believe that with the right story and the right connection, we can still unlock levels of support that may not have been seen otherwise or may have traditionally been focused upon. And the challenge is to find new ways of activating those communities. What I want to explain today is a way that we can, one of the ways that we can do this. So this is the opportunity. I'm sure that some people here will have already be familiar with this. The idea is value-based donor enrollment. Now, this was once called value exchange. Does this mean anything to anyone? A value exchange campaign? Has anyone heard of this? Okay, some shaking heads. So yeah, that's cool. Okay, yeah. So yeah, as I said, times change, so we've got to respond to this. Um, Now, this is value-based donor enrollment. It's part of our individual giving accelerator. That's me and my business partner, Nick, there. And as I said on the outset, our mission is to help ambitious charities build financial independence through donor enrollment activation and stewardship. This is all about resilience. In this day and age when we can't rely on grants anymore, we can't rely on government. So I'll talk you through this now. So, value-based donor enrollment rests upon two key points. The first one is that it is designed inherently to meet the donor at their point of need. The second one is that it begins with an offer. Now, you can contrast this with the way that charitable appeals generally operate, which is donate this money for this cause. And that works. The whole sector has rested upon that for decades, right? This is about, you know, putting the beneficiaries at the heart of it and making an ask on that basis. It's what we call a direct response campaign. Um, and it's focused on the needs of the charity and the charity's beneficiaries. It's a vital piece of the puzzle of any campaign, but it works most effectively when donors are ready to engage. A lot of the times, people aren't ready to engage. If you've done any paid ads, if you've put any TV advertising, direct mail, anything like that, a lot of it gets ignored. A lot of it gets completely, it just people don't see it because they're not ready to engage with it yet. So there's a lot of wasted time and money, I think, goes into these sort of campaigns that are direct response. And so this is where a value-based asset comes into play. A value-based asset is essentially a thing that a prospective donor would get in exchange for handing you their details. In the private sector, it's simply called a lead generation campaign. You give something for free, someone gives you their details, you then nurture that relationship to the point where someone wants to work with you in some way. And this could be a guide, a resource, a quiz, could even be a small product, sticker pack, pin badge, something like that. And as you can see, some of the larger organizations are already doing this sort of stuff. These are screenshots from my own Facebook feed. Salvation Army have a children's outside guide. Someone say something there. Um, Fair Share offer free recipe cards, and the WWF have got a wellbeing pack. So you can see how, hopefully, you can see how using a value-based asset like this to begin with an offer rather than an ask can be a really profound way to build potential donors. So here's the key distinctions between the two. And I believe that every campaign needs both of these in tandem. Traditionally, it's the direct response campaign that everyone goes for. And that is the one that asks for money. It focuses on the needs of the charity and the beneficiaries, asks for immediate action, uses urgency. And because of that, there's probably a low likelihood of action. All those things combined, you want to stop the scroll, so to speak, someone's channel surfing on the TV or scrolling through Facebook, to actually capture that attention, it's quite a low likelihood. The value-based campaign, on the other hand, it offers value. It doesn't make an ask. It focuses is on the donor's needs. It's not asking for anything immediate. It's more of a nurturing process. And I would say there's an increased likelihood of them becoming, of that campaign being effective on that basis. If we just go back to that last one I showed you there, I downloaded all of these, in particular the Salvation Army one. I've got two young kids. There's some great stuff in there. It appeared in my Facebook feed, and I thought I don't actually give to them as an organization, but I downloaded the guide. Now I'm on their mailing list. They have my data. They know who I am. So this is what we call the value-based donor enrollment model in its entirety. So it starts out with these four pillars. The first one is that generating awareness. Now, I would recommend doing this if you can through paid advertising. It's the shortest, sharpest, quickest way to get eyes on what it is that you do. You don't need to spend a ton of money. You just need to invest a little bit into adverts that link people through to that value-based asset. So the ad is not an ask, it's an offer. When you capture their details, they're then in your system. You can then move them into activation. So you can still make an ask after that, a day or so later, or even immediately after they've engaged with you, you can make an ask. Whether they do or whether they don't, you want some stewardship content via email, which you will have from them that, yeah, will basically help them become involved with your organization in some way. It might be a donation, might be a donation in kind, it might be time, it might be something else, another way of getting involved. Is this making sense to everyone? How do you feel about it? Well, I'd love to just get people's perspectives on this in the chat because I'm sure that this isn't new to everyone here, and I'm sure that some people have even tried something like this. So if anyone's open to sharing in the chat or on the if you come off mute, then I'd love to hear. Susie, I've heard of this. I'm pondering what to offer. Would all the email journeys be automated? Yes, they would. Yeah. I mean, you could still, if you have like a weekly newsletter or something like that, you can add people to that list as well, or you could offer them the opt-in. But as part of a campaign, I would certainly automate. Can this integrate with CRMs? Yeah, should be able to. Yeah. The way that we would do this, which I will come on to, would integrate with CRMs because it would essentially be either a direct link to a CRM or it would that you'd get the data in a CSV format. What are the costs of running such a campaign? Yeah, so the way that we would do this, I'm going to come on to that in a bit if you would like to stick around for that. Um, Probably the biggest cost is in terms of money would be the ads, depending on how much you wanted to actually get out of it. There could also be an unseen cost of time if it's not something that you're familiar with and there's a lot of experimentation. It could take quite a lot of time to set this up if you haven't done it before. And what if people don't consent to further contact? Well, if they don't consent, then I guess you've lost them. Is the short answer to that one. Well, I say you've lost them. You will still probably appear in their feeds. Um, yeah, I guess you would need to give them a compelling reason to stay in touch, right? How closely aligned to the charity's work do you think the content offer should be? That is a really good question. Um, I shared something similar last month, actually, on storytelling. I'm not sure if you were there for that one, Anne. I think you may have seen it. I shared an example of the Howard League, who focus on prisoner well-being. They ran a campaign called Books for Prisoners, whereby they were responding to the government's decision to stop books being sent into prisons. They activated a whole bunch of donors that were not linked to that charity's core goals at all. It wasn't about prisoner well-being. It was more about education. It was more about the right to read. So they activated people who were interested in self-education, authors, yeah, people who love fiction. So in a way, you don't have to be completely 100% aligned to the core mission. You just need to meet the donor where they're at, meet them on their basis, their interests, and then link it to what you do, then make an ask. Google Ads have a grant that you can apply for, which is 10 grand a month. Yes, they do. Yeah, I would definitely recommend having a look at that if you haven't so far. Phoebe, we work within specific London boroughs. Is there a way to target people who work or live in specific areas? Yes, there is. I mean, if you were to, all of the social platforms have pretty sophisticated ad platforms in them now. It's how they make their money. Data is being bought and sold, right? All the time. We might as well use that. So you can get very targeted. You can target local businesses, for example, local business people with resources that would introduce them to the work that you do in a way that would meet their needs. What kind of content would you use in the stewardship stage? Is it just fundraising related or does it span other areas? I think that this would depend largely upon the initial reason why someone signed up. As a rule, I would put in their impact stories. I would also make the ask as well in regular places. Share the stories of people that you've helped, things that you've maybe funded yourself, changes that you've made. It just, yeah, it's a nurturing process. It's a stewardship process. So we don't need to hit them over the head with a big ask with loads of urgency, but you can pepper it into those emails, definitely. No one's got any other questions. I'll move on. So the potential for impact for this. After I downloaded this Children's Outside guide from the Salvation Army, I cheekily reached out to them and asked if they would be willing to share some data on how well this has performed for them. And they came back and said they're only halfway through their campaign. This is a test for them, but they're already seeing quite a lot of good results, more so than I actually expected. They said they've exceeded their lead generation targets with 40% of the campaign still to run. In that time, it's been downloaded 4,500 times. And the stewardship email sequence for them has got an average click to open rate. That's the engagement rate of 55%, which is actually really high. In my experience, I would get around that, maybe a bit lower. But I also know that in particular, charities that are out there asking for money a lot of the times would probably see a lower rate of action there, a lower engagement rate. So you can kind of see how this is working for them. One thing that they really shared with me that a really important thing was income is not their key metric. Now, obviously, when you're an organization of a certain size, you can be a bit experimental. You don't have to worry too much about this. But they said to me that they're looking at this as a lead generation campaign because they get the numbers through the door. They know that sooner or later, a good portion of those people will give back. They will either donate, they will volunteer, they will do something that is of benefit to that organization and its beneficiaries. So it's a long-term view. Um, I also saw another campaign recently by Oxfam, who generated 3,000 leads over the course of an 8-week period, I think it was. And I think 2.5% of those turned into repeat givers. So, yeah, the potential impact for the value-based approach is very high, but it does require a long-term view. So these are the kind of key principles, really. Just to reiterate that What you will need is a willingness to invest in the long term. You're probably going to see your money go down before it starts to come up. It could be a year, 2 years even before actually those prospects turn into viable donors. And I know that this sometimes doesn't fit with the pattern of grant making and fundraising and things like that. I know that there's a lot of pressure from trustees and CEOs to just make things work. But as we know, fundraising is it's always going to be a long-term game. You will also need systems and processes to handle large amounts of data. As we looked at the last one there, 4,500 people came through. I think their campaign was 6 weeks. So in 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, they got 4,500. That's quite a lot of money they're spending, right, to get that, I would imagine. But if you got 4,500 people drop into your database in a month, you need things in place to handle that. You need the scalability there. And I would say that from a mindset perspective, from a team perspective, you need to be ambitious and inquisitive, able to measure and respond to that information as it comes in. Any content you produce, any ads, the value asset itself is probably going to need tweaking, stewardship content, tweaking, looking at it on a daily basis for the first month or two, seeing which emails aren't getting opened or which emails aren't getting clicked, and then looking for those drop-offs and then tightening up subject lines, call to actions, the content itself, those kinds of things. But here's what it looks like it would deliver for you. It's essentially a system that you can repeat and that you can increase if you wished to generate unrestricted income. Income that you can do whatever you want with, as long as you're serving your communities, right? Enabling longer term planning, financial independence, and a whole new level of impact. Just to reiterate as well, found another source on this, Fundraising ROIs 2025, some research by Lark Owl. They found that individual giving investment generally returns about £5.47 for every £1 spent, which is huge. I mean, their research is based upon 2.5 appeals and 6.7 newsletters per year, which is a bit different to what we're suggesting here because those are specific appeals, whereas the value-based asset approach is an ongoing, long-term, yeah, never ending, really. You could just have that running constantly. So I don't know exactly what the return would be, but again, if it's north of £1, you're in profit as long as you're not spending too much on service providers and things like that. Any questions before I go on? How's this sounding to everyone? I'm going to take the silence as a good thing. Cool. So now, before anyone jumps into this, it's really important to get very clear on who your ideal donor is, because I've made this mistake myself in the past, throwing money into paid ads in particular, without having very clear clarity on who I'm supposed to be targeting and who I'm talking to. The money goes nowhere. Well, I'll tell you, it goes into Mark Zuckerberg's pockets. So we really need to know who our ideal donor is. So this is a demographic and a psychographic understanding of your ideal donor, and this gives you the insight into the emotional drivers and the things that they want and the things that they need, right? Because fundraising, yes, of course, it's about generating money for a good cause, but people give for their own reasons, and it's not entirely selfishly all the time. So we want to know things like the basics, the demographic stuff, their age, gender, their location, their profession. But we also want to know their life situation. Do they have caring responsibilities? Do they have children? Do they commute? Do they work at home? We don't need to know everything about them, but we build up a picture of who they are. We can then inform that any ads that we put out there. key interests, beliefs and values, and priorities. And yeah, this is what would underpin, yeah, not just the value-based asset or anything that's related to a value-based campaign, but any content you put on social media as well or on your website. I think that we could all do with having a review period of who our ideal donors are on a regular basis, just to make sure that what we're producing and who we're speaking to is in alignment with what those donors want and need. Um, Guy says, how far in advance would you say one needs to start preparing for such value-based campaigns, or what kind of prep stages you'd suggest thinking about? Are you asking, is there any particular stage of this that is prompting that question, Gaia?
Hiya.
Hi.
Yes. So it just it would just be helpful to know what kind of stages you personally would go through in terms of preparing all of this. So one thing that I thought about was understanding the what kind of content to put out. So whether it is guides or any sort of content, as you said at the very first of this webinar. So that was one stage that I was thinking about. But any other sort of steps um, that you think would be necessary to think about so that I can factor them in when I bring this up to my managers, because this would be very interesting for us to try it out, because we've been not really good at oh my god, stewarding donors, but also not very good at getting some fundraising money. So and because this is the very first time that we are doing something like this, it would be good to know a bit more about what stages we should think of, or what kind of prep we should think ahead, if it makes sense. Sorry if it's rambling, but I hope that's making sense.
It does, thank you, and I appreciate being candid there about stewarding. And I hear it a lot. I talk to a lot of fundraisers and small charity CEOs in particular, and stewardship is something that, yeah, a lot of people have they haven't quite figured out yet. And especially if you do tend to rely on money from, large high net worth individuals, for example, or it's not about numbers. If it's not about numbers, then the stewardship doesn't really matter as much. So yeah, I totally hear that. I'm going to explain to you the process that I would go through now, which is basically illustrated by this diagram here. The ideal donor profile is what we would work on first. So I don't run a charity, but if I did, that's the first thing I look at. I run a private business. I would just replace that for ideal customer profile. So that is really the guiding star and the guiding principle for everything that we do. So that is where I would start. And you can do that by looking at you could survey existing donors, even if you only have a handful of them. You could put surveys on your website, for example. You could ask on social media. If you have any regular givers, you could interview them. Just find out why people donate to you. What is it, and ask them a few questions about their lives, and just be interested and capture knowledge about them. And that will shed so much light on who you're talking to, and help you build that connection with them. So that is where I would start. I would also, like I said a moment ago, I would also review that on a regular, semi-regular basis just to keep it fresh. The next thing I would do is I would start looking at what that value-based asset would be. So this is a person here, this ideal client, sorry, ideal donor profile. This is a person, this is where they are, this is how old they are roughly, this is what they're interested in. What might be interesting to them that we could produce that's relevant to our charity? So the Salvation Army one is a great example, appeared in my feed because Facebook knows that I'm a dad of two young kids. They give me a children's outdoor guide. Next thing you know, I'm growing cress in my kitchen because that's what the guide told me to do. So that's you can see how there's a clear link there. Once you have the asset in place, that's when you start thinking about the ads. It's not necessarily ads, it could just be social media content, whether it's content that you publish for free or content that you pay to be boosted. It doesn't matter. The content still should be in relation to the value-based asset. I wouldn't launch those ads until I've got the stewardship content written though. So basically, know who my ideal client is, know what they want, ideal client, ideal donor, to tell the world that I'm in, ideal donor profile, know what they want, have some stewardship content that is going to support everything that you've talked about so far, the value-based asset, the work that you do, their interests as an individual. Then you have a system in place that if you wish, you could run paid ads to, and then you get lots of data in very quickly, and you can iterate that, improve that, and yeah, build for the longer term. Does that answer your question, Gaia?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much.
No problem. Anyone else got any questions on that? Okay, so what I'm going to do is send you a brochure for what we offer here after this webinar. It includes a few more examples. It basically just explains what I've done in this presentation. Um, if you're interested in that, reach out to me and we can have a conversation. On the next slide, I've got some information on what it looks like to actually work with us, including deliverables and pricing. So if you're interested in that, feel free to stick around. If you're not interested in being pitched to, feel free to hop off. It's entirely your call. But look out for that in your inbox, either today or, well, it'll actually be tomorrow now. So what we're looking at here is a 6-month program, essentially. This is what we call the Individual Giving Accelerator. Anything less than 6 months, especially if you're starting from a small data pool, yeah, you're not going to get a ton of results from, depending on how much you spend on those paid ads. But here's what's included in this accelerator. The first thing is identification of those ideal donor profiles. And like I said a moment ago, what we would look at is any data that you have currently, surveying the existing donor base, looking at putting surveys on websites, social media, etc., just to pull in as much information as we can, looking at any CRM data to help us identify really who would be most likely to work with you. We'd also set up the paid ads. We'd manage those and optimize them on a regular basis just to make sure that they're performing. We'd also create that value-based asset, which will probably be a PDF download like the Children's Outside Guide one. Using any brand assets that you have, pull that together, turn it into something nice that can be delivered to those would-be donors. We'd also create the chain of stewardship emails as well and make sure that those get tweaked and improved as data starts to roll in. And of course, training, support, and encouragement. This is a lot about self-sufficiency. I would love to be able to help charities like yourselves integrate something like this and then know how it works and replicate it. Our mission is really to help not just financial resilience, but diversity and independence. And I think that something like this that you can plug and play could be really, really helpful. So the outcomes that you can expect from this really, I would expect to see a rapid increase in prospects, at least potentially donors as well. And once you have enough data in, you know that based upon how much money you've put into it, what's coming out the other end. If you want to increase that, you can expect the increase to come out the other end as well. Better quality data as well, because it's going to be more focused. It's going to be more tailored to those ideal donor profiles. And like I said a moment ago, a repeatable process for lead and income generation. And if you're interested in this, it's just 6,500 plus any ad spend. We're not currently VAT registered, so it's just 6,500. Ad spend would vary. I would say you'd probably want to spend at least 500 a month, depending on the networks, to really see any movement and get some data that you can work with over the longer term. Anyone got any questions on that at this point? how many hours per month does each charity get in the 6 month program? Well, we wouldn't do it on an hourly basis. Quite frankly, we're more interested in outcomes. So we always want to see a positive return. So we would move. I was going to say move heaven and earth, but that sounds a little bit dramatic. We would work to make sure that this is working essentially. So we wouldn't do it in hours. Cool. Okay. So, like I said, I'm going to send out the brochure after this, which will detail everything that I've talked about here. By all means, go away and try this yourselves. Like, I really recommend it. You don't need a ton of money. The value-based asset doesn't need to be amazing to begin with. It could just be something that you put together with a bit of love and see how it goes. And yeah, look out for that. And if anybody wants to have a chat with me, you can either reply to the email that you're going to get with the brochure in it, or just send me an email there. Cool. Okay, so if there's no more questions, we'll call it a day.
Sorry, I have one quick question.
Go for it.
So if there's no kind of set hours per month over the program, what kind of so would it be just if we need support with something, we could just drop you an email? Like what would the support look like in terms of if we have any questions or want to have a quick call, that kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah, it would be over email and quick calls. Yeah, there would be ad hoc support in this. The reason that we say that is because it's a very focused campaign. There are very few moving parts, and it's pretty well isolated. So we wouldn't see it as something that would spill out into all kinds of other areas. So it's a very tight process. So that's why we would make sure that we're available to make sure it works.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Cool. Okay. Well, we will end it there then. Thank you, everybody. I hope that that was helpful. Thank you very much for coming and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye bye.
Thank you.